Thank you all for coming. This is, as you guys are, obviously aware, this is NBC's. This is our first, to my knowledge, orphan care ministry seminar. So let's open a word first. Dear Lord, thank you for this time that we have, that we can take some moments and think about orphans. We recognize and say Orphan Sundays we set aside just to remember the orphans around the world and how you've called us to care for them. We pray that you would grant wisdom to those who are speaking today, and open the hearts of those who are here, that you might be able to do your will and answer your call as it pertains to us. We pray this in the name of your Son. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian Andrzejczyk. We've got several presenters today. You can see them listed here. Basic format today is I'm going to come up and give you guys a couple brief talks about, or a couple brief notes on just some statistics, what the Bible has to say about taking care of orphans. Then we're going to pass the mic off to the stewards, who are then going to talk about foster care. Then we have international adoption, the Deckers, domestic adoption, the Lindberghs, and orphan care through missions for the Smallnies. This is our purpose for today. To gain an overview of God's command to care for the orphans, the state of the orphan, and to acquire a broad understanding of general methods of orphan care. I'm a teacher, so it's my personal habit to write up some gobbledygook objective period. So basically what we wanted to do is we wanted to give you guys a general overview of, hey, what does God say about caring for the orphans, and what are ways we can do that. This is going to be extremely broad because each one of these topics we could spend several hours on. So I asked each one of them to try to narrow it down to about 7 minutes. Yeah, so we're going to do our best. There are plenty of resources, which I mentioned to you here in the packet in just a moment, that are going to be able to extend what we're going to be covering. If you want to, you can go look at any of those other things as well. One of the big things you're going to hear is indirect and direct. Different ways of caring for orphans directly and indirectly. And I have just some rough ideas up here, but each speaker, when they talk about their section, is going to mention these are direct ways of caring for orphans. And when we say that, we're referring to those who are going out and getting their hands dirty, so to speak, with orphan care, whether it be through adoption, setting up orphanages, foster parenting, or on the indirect side, prayer, financial support, where you're still very much doing what you can to care for orphans. It's just not as hands-on as the direct side is. Here's a bit of the background as to who we are, too. About last March, February, somewhere around there, a group of us got together and went through a book called Orphanology, which basically what that does is that talks about what God's calling command is for people to take care of orphans across the world. It goes through all the first 4 chapters, are all biblical standards for that. And then the second 4 are different ways that we can live that out as Christians. And from that, a group of us got together and said, you know what, let's make an orphan ministry here at NBC. So we met with the elders, and they said, let's go ahead. And what you guys are seeing here is really the first major thing that we've done in order to be able to present to you guys some of the things we've been learning. There's other things that we're going to be doing too as it goes on. But for our intents and purposes, this is us. That's our background. We've actually called ourselves Hector, for lack of a better name. I tried to come up with things like heavens, evangels, caring together for orphan unification, or something like that. But no, it doesn't work. I think the first one did I spelled it wrong. So that's who we are. This orphan ministry is going to be doing more and more. As you know, this isn't just coming out of the blue. This is something that's been in the works really for several years. I think we first started talking to Pastor Garrett almost 2 years ago. So yeah, Michael Spaulding's made the name. Just my citation. He's back. So back there it is. But this is something that's been in the works for several years. The packet that you guys have here, I put a table of contents on the front for it. I'm just going to real quick go through some of it. The ones that I would really pay attention to are the appendices down here in the bottom, because we're not going to get into them. You know, the first 2 pages, these are things that are specific to what we're going to be going over. Like when I'm talking, I'm going to mention pages 2 and 3. But I would really spend some time and I'll look at Appendix A. It's on page 7 of your notes. Appendix A is a note written from John Piper to his wife Noelle when they first considered adoption. And she suggested it to him, and he said, let me pray about it, think about it for a while. And when he came to a conclusion, this was the letter he wrote to her. And I find it's very good for people as they're considering things like that as well. appendix, or page 8, appendix B, and also a number of resources that you guys can find online. For those of you who are online, I'm sorry that you have to type that entire URL out. And I'm not about to hand a tablet to everybody to say, here you go. It won't happen. And page 9, this is a list of, to my knowledge, all of the references in Scripture about the fatherless. Now, there are plenty of times in the Bible, if you Google how many times the fatherless comes up in the Bible, it's an incredible number. But not every one is a direct correlation to what we're talking about today. So this list here is the only one that I know of that has all of them in there that are directly applied to the commands that God has for us regarding orphans. And give you news page. All right, moving on. I have 4 biblical convictions I'm going to share with you guys. With each one, I'm going to give you a scripture verse to go with it. There are many ways that we can look at what the Bible says about orphan care. I could say things like, well, there's precedent set that God loves us, therefore we love other people. God has mercy on us, we have mercy on other people. There's a whole list of other things that God has done first, and then we have then reciprocated and done. God adopts us, as Pastor Steve said today, and therefore we adopt orphans. So what he does for us vertically, we then do horizontally. What I'm going to do instead, though, is I'm going to just look right at the direct commands that comes out of the Bible. So the first biblical conviction that we have is that God is concerned for all people who are made in his image. And Jonah 4:11 says, "And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell the right hand from their left, and there's also many animals." Second biblical conviction is that he is especially concerned for the fatherless. Psalm 68, 5-6. "A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows, is God in his holy dwelling. God sets up lonely families. He leads out prisoners with singing. But the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land." And these are all on page 2 of the notes, by the way. If you want, I have other references there too, if you want to follow them up there. Some less boring speakers part. That was a joke. Nervous laughter, well done. Number 3, God commands his people to share his concern for the fatherless. And I have Isaiah down here for this one, 1:17-18. "Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and plead the widow's cause." And again, I'm going to draw your attention back to page 9. This whole list here, as I said, this is all of the references there that talk about taking care of the fatherless, seeking justice for the fatherless, looking after the orphan, the widow in their distress. Just because I stuck one up there, it's all through Scripture. Okay, so just because I put one there for the sake of time, I'm not going to read the entire sheet to you. And lastly, the 4th one is that God is pro-adoption. And Pastor Steve did a fantastic job setting us up today, talking about having a spirit of adoption. There really is no one verse that you can put your finger on and say, this right here commands us to go out and adopt other kids. You kind of have to take some hurdles to do it. Like he did today, that we have been adopted, and we are to be imitators of God, and therefore we need to make the next step and say theologically that yes, we should be adopting. But this quote here comes out of the book Orphanology. I'll read it to you real quick as well, just that you can see it. What it does, it sums up everything we've said so far. "The doctrine of adoption is at the heart of the gospel. Adoption was never plan B, it has always been plan A. Existed before the world existed. Paul wrote, in love, he predestined us for adoption as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will." That's Ephesians 1:4-5. God planned on the act of adoption before creation. In John Piper's words, adoption is greater than the universe. Now, let's talk about the gospel here and how we failed to meet it. Between 143 and 210 million are orphans worldwide. That's an incredible number. That does not account for street children. And every day, more than 5,760 kids in the world become orphans. Again, these are incredible numbers. And that number is likely to be on the low side. As I mentioned, does not include street children. The Middle Eastern nations don't report their numbers. This all is from UNICEF. So it comes right from the UN. Middle East does not report their numbers. And there are many kids all across the world who are just off the map because no one even knows they exist. No one knows they're an orphan, no one even knows they're born. So the number, it could be as high as twice that high. 9,320 children were adopted into American families in 2011. In 2012, it dropped to 8,668. In foster care, in our own country, nearly 500,000 are in the American foster care system. 130,000 of those are immediately available for adoption. Here's the reason why I call this a hole in the gospel. 225 million Americans profess to be Christian. You know, if we are answering God's call to care for the fatherless, we're missing these numbers in here. We should not have this large of a gap, even within our own nation. And so far I've talked about adoption as the point of orphan care. It's not. We call it the consummation. We said that is the ultimate consummation of orphan care, but there are many other ways to do it and many other things we look at across the world. For example, in Russia, we've got 750,000 kids living in institutions of foster care. Only 17% of those are immediately available for adoption. Many of them are just placed there due to financial or medical hardships. So the question is, what do we do that we're supporting them? Or what are Christians around the world doing to support them? So my part is almost done on statistics. The last thing I want to say is we're not going to show you today pictures of the starving kids. We're not going to show you the ones with you've seen them all. They usually around Christmas time they all kind of pop up. We're not going to do that. There's a couple pictures of kids in here, but they're all smiling. That's not what this is about. What I want to set you up with, this is a biblical mandate. This is what the Bible says. This is what we're moving from. I did want just to offer you one thing, though, is I would encourage you to, if you're curious, look up on the internet and see what are some of the issues that orphans go through. Because we're not going to get into it. There are serious emotional issues that go on. There are serious physical issues that go on with these kids. They're not just sitting there in a daycare waiting for someone to come along to pop them in a family. There are a lot of things going on in those little kids' heads that is causing damage. It's going to take a whole lifetime for them to resolve. This picture right here is a crib. And the reason why I include it is this right here is the area where that kid laid the whole time, rubbing her head on the top of the crib because she had nothing else to do. She sat in the crib for 22 hours a day, and she wore the paint off of it because she sat there day in and day out. And when she was adopted, the back of her head was flat from having laid in that crib all the time. And this was a good orphanage. That was a good story. There are many others that are a lot worse. This is pretty normal as far as things go. All right, and with that, I am now going to turn the microphone over to the stewards and come up and talk about the foster care.
Good afternoon. We're the stewards. We have been foster parents now for 2 years. We're going to try to not cry because it's something that I get really emotional about it because we talk about orphans and we know 2 of them. We know their names. We pray for them. We have one living in our house. Although the baby that we currently have in our house has both of her parents, with foster care, it's always a bad situation. It's never a good situation that they're brought out of. A lot of people think that Lancaster County Children and Youth are going to come after you because they find out that you spanked your kids in a Walmart. And that is never the case. It's always a severe situation that the baby has to be removed. And it's always bad. We'll talk a little bit about our first baby that we got a little bit later. Let's start just going through what foster care is. Taking care of a child who has been placed in your home because he or she has been taken from his or her birth parents, usually because of abuse and neglect. The normal, run-of-the-mill reason why children are taken into foster care is because they've been abused or neglected. It's not always the case, but there's usually some sort of really bad situation that they're being brought out of. Does Lancaster County have foster kids? Currently, there are 415 foster children in Lancaster County. And there are only 155 open homes. So this is something where there are not enough homes for all of the kids. And a lot of the kids are older kids, and the school-age kids, maybe even teenagers, and they live in group homes. And they don't know what it's like to be in a family because they haven't been in a family, they've been in a group home.
And I should add that when they get to 18, they age out of the system. A child living in an institution, they age out. They don't have a family to go home to at Thanksgiving and Christmas. So they're just, what do? They've never known a family. And you can imagine all the mental problems that go along with that. But then, how do they, have a family? How do they start to make right choices? And that's a lot of the teenagers. And you might think, oh, they're bad kids. But these kids have been in and out of homes, and they just don't know what love is.
So a foster parent, if you look at the circle here, it is frustrating. That should be on the top. It is highly rewarding sometimes. You have visitations that you need to go to. If the parents what happens is the child is taken out of the parent's home, and then the parents are given a plan that they need to follow in order to get their children back. And part of the plan is weekly visits, especially when you have a baby. So these weekly visits, you have to go take the child to the visit and then drop the child off at the office. It's not a visit where you go to a park or something. You go to the office, it's a supervised visit, and then you come pick the child up again, and it is heart-wrenching. It brings you right back into the drama of foster care every week. And so that's, and if you have two parents that are, if there's an abuse situation where mom is apart from dad, and they can't be in the same building together because she's got a restraining order, then you have two separate visits on two separate days that you need to bring the child to. And so it can be very emotionally taxing, let's say that. That's a nice way of putting it. Frustrating. You're working with social workers who are not being well paid. So, I mean, if you have a job where that you're not really well paid and stuff, I mean, where it's frustrating. You have specialized medical visits. You have to take, how often are the medical visits when they're big?
Every 6 weeks. So it's more than your normal, until the child, if you get a baby, 0 to 6 months, you have to take them every 6 weeks. So it's not like 1 month and then, So there's just more medical visits, but if they have a problem or need counseling, then you're going to those medical visits.
And the birth parents are supposed to go to the medical visits.
Which sometimes happens.
Which sometimes happens, and if you're uncomfortable around the birth parents, then the social worker will come, which we've always been uncomfortable with one of the birth parents. So, moving on. So, there are pros and cons. And let me just share with you why Audrey and I got into this. We feel like God wants us to adopt at some point. It's always been plan A for us. We saw the John Piper quote that, adoption's plan A for God. Adoption's always been plan A for us. It was, we will have biological children, and then we're going to take in we're going to adopt children. And it's always been that way, and we've always talked about adoption. So with adoption is free through foster care if the child's parent rights are terminated. It's free. We don't have the income to pay for an international adoption or even a domestic adoption. So foster care is the way that we are going because we don't have the money for the other types of adoption, and we see the need. So we started going, we wanted to do foster to adopt because that's what everybody talks about. There's this foster to adopt. There are commercials all over the place on WDAC and WJTL. And when we went to Lancaster County Children and Youth, they said there's really no such thing. And we said, what? And they said, we've heard the commercials. And they said, well, it's a long, drawn-out process where you become a foster parent. The parents get a plan. If they complete the plan, they get their child back. So the child's rights have to be terminated beforehand. So these people that do foster to adopt, which you'll hear the Limberts talk about, that's a program where these children have been in foster care and now their parents' rights have been terminated, so they're available for adoption. We wanted to, because we felt that it was wise, we wanted for the youngest child in our home, we wanted any foster children that we took in to be younger than our youngest biological child, just so that our kids could be mentoring these children and so that our children would be safe. We didn't want to take in an 8-year-old and have him beating up our kids, and which could happen. And so to protect our children, we said, okay, well, we're going to have these kids, these foster kids, fall in line with our birth order that we have established. And so in order to get a baby or a young child, the best way to do that, if you want to adopt, is through Lancaster County Children and Youth, is what we found. But, I mean, there are other ways to do it as well. But for us, we felt that this was a calling by God put on our hearts to do this. We realized that not everybody has the calling, and we had to give up a couple of idols that we have. One is comfort, because we don't like being uncomfortable. Another is the idol of the empty nest, where we look forward to the time when our children will be gone. And by bringing younger children into our home, that pushes that empty nest further and further away, to the point now where we go, well, we're in it for the long haul. This is foster care that we're going to be doing for a while, and we're going to adopt any children that might become adoptable while we are foster parents. So we've given up the empty nest idea entirely. We have no idea if we're ever going to have one, and we're okay with that. We are. And we've given it up. But it was, for us, it was an idol that we were serving.
I should say we changed. We were kind of in the fog about this foster to adopt. That's why we got into it. But I think in the past 2 years, our hearts have changed because we don't know if we're going to adopt. We don't know if we're ever going to adopt. So now I think our whole mindset has changed, that we're just going to take care of the children that God places in our home for as long as God places it in our home. And we really had to rely on God for that and really let our hearts feel that. Our mindset has really changed.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Some of the pros that I wanted to highlight real quick is making a difference in the lives of children, helping to halt cycles of abuse, poverty, and addiction, exposing the family, our family, to the joy of giving and community service, but the joy of having a baby in the home, a child in need in the home, has far outweighed any of these cons. There are more cons than there are pros. The cons are very frustrating. The expectation of professional behavior by a foster parent, that you are to remove yourself emotionally from the whole situation, that's not going to happen. It's a baby, Okay, child, it's time to eat. She is a member of our house as long as she's there. The lack of respect and understanding from society in general, being given little or no chance to offer input into decisions that affect the child's future, having children removed from the home when you think that they should stay. That's hard. We had a little baby girl. Our first foster baby, we decided that we would take any baby that came our way, and regardless of race, gender, and medical needs. And our first baby, we got the call while I was going to, the only day of the summer that I actually had to work, I was driving, and Audrey calls me, and she said, Lancaster County Children and Youth called, they have a baby, she's a little girl, she's got fractured ribs, and she might not be able to see because her parents beat her. And I said, well, okay, let's take her. And within the first 3 days, she was looking at us and smiling at us. I asked myself, does God want us to raise a blind child? Maybe. Our current little baby, she had some hearing issues. And we thought, does God want us to raise a deaf child? Maybe. We'll see. And so a couple of things that you can do for direct involvement is become a co-laborer. Become what they don't call us foster parents because that's got negative connotations. So now we're resource parents. So now that's going to have a negative connotation. Become a court-appointed special advocate, which is CASA. That involves training, and then you look out for the interests of the kids. Let me just say that indirect involvement is nearly as important. I mean, just pray for foster families, notes, emails of encouragement. We've gotten so much support from people here at church, and we really appreciate it. Meals, here's the thing. You sit there at home, and they call you one day, and you've got 2 people coming over for dinner. And they say, got a baby, come to the hospital. And we were supposed to have dinner guests. And so I got in the car and drove to Women's and Babies and picked up a 2-day-old. And she's in our house still. It's been 14 months. And so it's just, there's no preparation. Like usually you have 9 months or so. And for this, it's, you've got a crib set up and you get an hour. You need to come now. You know, and it's like,
and usually there's a lot of, the first 2-3 weeks are crazy. You have social workers, doctor's appointments, all these people have to come to your house. You have to set up visitations with the birth parents. So the first 2 to 3 weeks are very stressful. You don't know if the child's staying there. They might go with the relatives because in foster care, if any relative who has a good background check wants to take care of this baby, regardless if they're married or living with their boyfriend or, you know, as long as they're a blood relative, the baby lives with them.
DNA trumps everything. It's just the way it is.
And that's what happened with our first baby. She went with an uncle that wasn't married. But, so there's, the first 2 to 3 weeks are very crazy,
So there are other ways that you can have indirect involvement. Understanding what the foster family is going through. People totally mean well all the time when they talk to us. But things that we hear time and time again are, I couldn't do that, or it's going to be hard saying goodbye, or I'd get too attached. Yeah, we do too. I mean, like, God wants us to. He wants us to take this child in and treat her like she's ours, and we get too attached too. I mean, but as far as it'll be hard saying goodbye, we know that that's so well-intentioned when somebody says that to us. But it's kind of like, I equate it like when somebody gets a new puppy and somebody goes up to them and goes, oh, it's going to be really hard watching that dog get old and then die. You know, that's the worst part of owning a dog. Don't remind people when they get a puppy. So that's the worst, you know, it's just, for us, I mean, that's a terrible analogy, but I mean, just to give you a picture, that's what it's like when people go, oh, it's going to be really hard saying goodbye to her. Or my grandmother, every time she sees a baby, says, she's so cute, her parents are going to want her back. Yeah, I mean, well, once they see her, they're going to want her back. And it's like, well, they see her all the time, and they're maybe making some progress. So anyway, I think that's it for us. But there, on page 4 of your informational packet, I took too much time, I apologize, is resources. If you want to talk to us afterwards, we are going to be an open book for you. So thank you.
I'm Rob, and this is my wife Laura Decker. We're here to talk about international part of it. We're actually in the final stages now of completing foreign adoption from China, which we're going to roll down there named Chenyu. And what we've gone through is we've learned through that process there. Insights we can share with you a little bit.
All right, well, first of all, we're going to go through the process that you would go through if you are going to adopt internationally. First, you need to fill out a formal application. When you are finished with that, then you get to have a home study done where a social worker will come and ask you lots and lots of questions about your family. At the end of the home study, they're going to come to your house and do a visit and see what your house looks like. Some social workers are very particular and they will want to look in all your closets and check everything to make sure that it's perfect. Some social workers want to make sure that your water is tested and that it's fine. Some social workers, like ours, she just came in, kind of glanced around and was like, okay, you guys are good. Let me just make sure you have hot water in your house. So just depends on the social worker. Next, you have a dossier that you have to put together. That's for any country. That's just a lot of papers that you need to send over to the country, and then the officials can look at that and say, okay, yes, you are suitable to have one of our children. And then, then they will match you up with the child. That's called a referral. So sometimes you can be matched with a child, or you can pick your child, or the child will be, shown to you, matched with you. So it just depends what your agency does and how you want to do it. After you have your child that you're matched with, then you get a letter of acceptance from the country. Here's ours.
In Chinese.
Yeah.
Can't read it.
After that, then you have to go through a lot of immigration paperwork to make sure that your son or daughter, when he or she comes to America, that they will be a citizen. After that, you need to apply for visas. That's for us to apply for visas. That's kind of where we are right now. And then after that, you will get a travel invitation from the country, and then you can go over and pick up your son or daughter.
Just some of the issues and needs that are out there. There's oftentimes a misconception with the special needs label. Many of the children will have that label. It could be a physical handicap. It could be an age. They've been in the system for a while, sibling groups, minor correctable needs. Sometimes they've been repaired already or have started a treatment process to repair those kind of things. The wait time is significantly less for a special needs child than it is for a normal child. Other options that are out there are just the need of sponsorship. You don't have to adopt a child. If that is something God's leading to you towards, that's great. But can sponsor, you've probably heard of Compassion and World Vision, the Assembly program, where they basically sponsor an orphan in particular there. Just awareness of the needs that are out there and just prayer for that. They go hand in hand there. Just knowledge of just the whole issue there, which is what a lot of today is about there. And then funding is a big part of international adoption. I'll mention a little more about that a little later.
All right, so some indirect ways that you can be involved is financial. That doesn't mean that you give specifically to us, but that means that you would give to maybe somebody who's doing a grant for an adoption or something else like that. Definitely you can pray for orphans wherever in the world. Also, there's an awareness of attachment issues. When we come back with our daughter, you might think we went into hibernation, but it's not that we are trying to separate from you guys or anything. It's that we want to have our daughter attached to us. When you're in an orphanage, you have a lot of different caregivers that take care of you, and so you don't really attach to any particular one. You just kind of, okay, here's the next person that's going to care for me for a little bit, and then here's the next one, and on and on. So when our daughter comes back, we're going to want to make sure that we can attach with her, and that she can attach with us, so that we're like, the end all, Also, when we do that, we're going to need some respite care for the other kids because it will be a lot easier to attach to her if we don't have the other 4 around. So anyway, that's just another way that you can indirectly help her by helping us with the other ones. And then just to be there with support and encouragement.
Financially, giving to particular people is always an option there.
Is it like us?
Yeah. Take cash and credit after. International adoption is very expensive, and we've known for a number of years, even before we were married, that something was going to happen. And we've been saving for 11 years for this, and God has blessed us in being able to take care of most of that. Prayer for us. Brian says that the 6 months after we get back are going to be the roughest point of our family marriage and all that stuff. So just prayer for our adjustment and travel, and our kids are going to be away from us for a couple months there. But yeah, a couple weeks, a couple months. Just understanding of some of the issues there that any adopted family is going through as they're transitioning back. And we've not been there yet, so we don't know what all of those might be. But communication, asking us, just being aware of that, and underestimate the power of it all there. Child sponsorship, we have 2 children that we sponsor through an organization called Every Orphan's Hope. It's probably a similar type program to Compassion. What, $28 a month or something. And it's in Zambia. They have homes. It's a small group of like maybe 10 kids that live in a home with parents of some type. They're like, what's that?
With a mama.
Yeah. And they're living in a family situation there. Education and all that stuff's happening there, but it's in a home unit. And that's not taking the child out of the country. That's leaving them where they may still have relatives and extended family that just don't have parents that are still living there. And then obviously you can be directly involved through the process of adoption. But again, it's not for everybody. There's a lot you can do to indirectly support there.
And lastly, we have some resources. We have Bethany as an agency. That's the one that we have gone through, and we love them. So they're wonderful. Another agency down here is America World. That's just another agency that you could use if you're looking to adopt. Show Hope is a very generous organization that does grants. So if you are adopting and wondering about funds for adopting, they're definitely one to check out. Also, they are connected with the Empowered to Connect at the bottom, and they have a lot of different resources that you can use if you're adopting or have questions or whatever. They have a ton of resources on their website. And then the Every Orphan's Hope is the sponsorship that we have chosen to do. So we just put that in there too.
We have a brochure for the Every Orphan's Hope if you were interested in looking at it. The one we have. Bethany locally here has been great, just having a local office there. We've had a number of trainings and they've been just very helpful. There's a lot of organizations that are at the national level that may not have people right there in your same tent there. So we've gotten tons of resources. It is amazing how much is available just in Lancaster County services. We're at a special needs fair and have like 20 or 30 different agencies that are based out of Lancaster County. Just to help with all these different issues, not specifically to adoption, but learning needs, physical challenges, and early intervention, and all those kinds of things there.
All right, that's all that we have. We're going to turn it over to Bloomberg's.
All right, so you can turn in your packet to page 5. This is a really helpful guide. It says which program is right for our family. Yeah, page 5. And I'm going to talk about this just to show you the basics of it. I mean, it breaks down from foster care to the SWAN network. Now, this is meant as a Pennsylvania thing. It's from Communication Services for Pennsylvania people. And the statewide adoption network is something that would be tailored to us in PA. And domestic adoption and inter-country or international adoption there. As far as domestic stuff goes, you can see that that's a way to get a baby, and that the cost could be upwards of $20,000 plus legal fees, but there are some financial assistance things with federal tax credit, low-cost loans from Bethany Christian Services and others, and grants and so forth. That's I guess one way that people think of when they think of adoption. It's either the international one or I'm going to get a baby somewhere. This next one, which the stewards kind of mentioned a bit, the statewide adoption network or SWAN, is the one that Emily and I are in the process of working with. We have been going to trainings. We have to do 21 hours of training for working with children who come from very stressful situations and have had abuse, trauma, neglect, that kind of stuff. As the steward said, that's what gets a kid into foster care in the first place. And these kids in the SWAN network are only the ones who have had full parental ties cut. They are totally available for adoption at any moment. So sometimes they'll end up like on the SWAN network. You can go to the website and you can see these pictures, and some say not yet ready for adoption, but it's the kind of thing where this kid is on the fast track to getting in, as if that's a fast track that you want to be on. The ones that will be matched are ones who are definitely ready for adoption. So there's no chance for you, if you're going for a SWAN network child, to have the parent come back and say, you know what, actually I can test that, I've won back the rights to my kid. That just doesn't happen. It's been terminated legally. The SWAN network has some interesting things about it. They are children who are under age 18, and they're most likely ages 2 to 18, because as Stuart said, there's a certain time of parental goal achieving that can be met in order to put the child back or reunify them with their parents. And a child's not going to be ready for adoption through the SWAN network unless the parent has been given full legal opportunity, time, and recourse to show that they're making amends and that they're changing their lifestyle and meeting the goals that good families should have. So their ages 2 to 18, the child is currently in the foster system, and this is the amazing thing. Emily and I, when we were going through this orphanology book, we were thinking, where do we want to adopt from? We know that the Willoughbys have an orphanage, little baby home in South Africa. Could this be like a God thing to connect us with the Willoughbys? And we got a baby from South Africa. And I found out that was, and one of my coworkers is the mom of a lady who brings her adopted son to our VBS. And they happened to go to our relative's church, Crossway. And I said to this lady, how did your daughter adopt him? Like, where's he from? And she said, he's from Philadelphia, Andrew. They didn't go to Africa to get him. And I said, really? And I said, well, we're looking at Africa stuff. And she said, Andrew, this is how she's like really demonstrative. Andrew, they're right here. Right here in our state. You can do this. And I said, well, how do they afford it? It must cost a lot. Andrew, they pay them to do it. It's free, and they get paid. No way. That's how they can afford it, Andrew. That's what they do, And here's the amazing thing. There are 5 characteristics of special needs. And if your child is in the SWAN network, if a child is in the SWAN network, and has any one of these 5 characteristics, the state will pay you a daily stipend for being a foster parent after or during the time that you're foster parenting, after you adopt until the kid is 18. They are saying, thank you for taking this child into your home. And they will cover all those things. Like medical expenses, they can be paid for. Braces can be paid for. We haven't learned about college yet, but if they have any genetic, mental, or emotional disability, any genetic condition that brings them to a greater possibility for a disease or a handicap, this is phenomenal. They're called special needs if they are of a minority group. That is most of the kids on the SWAN network are in a minority group. If they're a part of a sibling group, like if they've got a brother with them and they want to keep them together, that is so much harder to get a family for them. So they are instantly labeled special needs. The state says we'll pay you daily to take care of this child until they're 18. They must be 5 years of age or older, or one of the siblings must be like that. Because when you get older than 4 or 5, people say, wow, that kid has got a lot of baggage, which is true, So they're harder to get families for. Here's the family, the Geyer family. They got little Julius. He's been at VBS. If anybody's been a VBS person, you've had Julius around. He's got lots of energy. And they got Julius as a foster kid. You foster these children for 6 months. And the children eases you in. Like you go visit them. They come visit you. The Geyers, they just happened to be at our Bethany thing yesterday. They were a foster or a SWAN family that came to give their testimony and to answer all kinds of questions. And they made Julius a little book with photos of their rooms in their home. And they said that his foster family said he just sleeps with that book. He looks at it and he sees, this could be my room. This will be the couch I sit on. This is the tree outside, right? So they would visit back and forth. And then he came to live with them for 6 months. It's like a trial period where they're probably going to have a honeymoon with you for a while, maybe, And then they'll start getting comfortable, or you'll start to realize we got to make some little rules here that might really fight back against that. And this is amazing. The day that they were going to adopt Julius in the court, they got a phone call as they were leaving the courthouse that mom has a baby that nobody knew about before. She's not allowed to have babies. She has to give them up. Would you be willing to be a foster parent? We'll send you her. But even before that, Julius was saying to them, I want a sibling, I want a brother or sister. And so they said to him, how about you pray for that? And boom, God answered the prayer. And that is his biological sister. They were able to adopt through the same network. Now they got her mighty young because they had her within 2 months of her birth in their home. But they were able to adopt her by age 2 or so. So when you see Julius at VBS, now you know a little bit about him and his parents. So here's some funding resources. A friend of mine who was actually at my wedding party, he and his wife adopted a little girl from Africa, and they've set up a fund called the Ruby Miles Fund. It's on the formwar.org website. She's involved with that, in creating that SWAN network also. Indirect ways to be involved. I'm not sure that I have any more here. Oh, getting your feet wet. If you're interested in looking at adoption, this Thursday there is a movie night at Penn Cinema, free movie. I think they're doing Despicable Me and Andy. You can take your pick. And the doors open at 6, and the movie starts at 6:30. And it's sponsored by the Adoption Coalition of Lancaster County. I'm assuming that they'll have people there that you can talk to, because why just show a movie and say, thanks for coming? I'm sure that they'll be here so you can say, hey, we're interested. What can you do for us? And we would attest that Bethany, who we're going through as our liaison with the SWAN network, has been very good. It's great to hear things from a godly perspective. When the stewards of foster care, they're working with the state, and we went to a children and youth foster care explanation time, or get your feet wet time. And it was a little discouraging because they don't approach it from a godly, hopeful standpoint. But Bethany they help you to see that this is infusing the gospel into just daily life. We come at it with a hopeful perspective that yes, there will be great trials and struggles, and your family and parenting style could be, and most likely will be, upended, and you will have to think in ways that you've never thought before. But God is with you, and He can do great things through you and in someone else's life too. So now the Schmallies will come on up.
Okay. So the portion of this that I want to touch on is worldwide orphan care missions. This is just another facet of the orphan ministry. As we've gotten going, we wanted to talk a little bit about what NBC is already doing. And the reality is that we've already got missionaries in foreign fields and in other nations who are involved in orphan ministry in one way or another. So what we tried to do early on is to reach out to those missionary families and to talk to them a little bit about what their experience was in the countries that they're working in, find out a little bit more about the countries that they're working in, and get some direct ties to their needs and their specific prayer requests and so forth, so that we can actually have a line into what they're doing there. It's a little more difficult for us to be hands-on in these places, but we can certainly provide for them by knowing what their material needs are and doing some things here, sending things to them, financial needs, prayer, and so forth. So I wanted to touch on 3 different countries tonight: South Africa, Japan, and India. So let's go ahead and look first at South Africa. The only resource you have in your packet, by the way, would be the page after Andrew's page, and it's just a set of links to resources that I have read through online that provide a lot of the statistics for what we're going to be reading through here. So South Africa is a nation where between 2002 and 2012, 4.7% of all children there lost both of their parents. This means that there are roughly 4 million orphans in South Africa. That's 1 in 4. That's a high number. The driving cause of this is, of course, the AIDS epidemic. 17 to 18% of the adult population in South Africa is HIV positive. And more than 30% of women giving birth at any given time are HIV positive. So parents are dying in South Africa, and they're creating orphans. And often in giving birth, they're passing HIV onto their children, and they're perpetuating that same cycle in the lives of their children. So this is a big issue. I have here mentioned migratory working patterns too. Economically, things are not great for families in South Africa either, so there are a lot of families that will leave the country and leave their children behind so that they can simply have enough money to live and to feed themselves. So all of these things contribute to what's going on in South Africa. Interacting with the Willoughbys has been a real blessing for us. I mean, we're all familiar with them, I think, or most of us are familiar with them. They've been to our church and they've presented here, and Katie has just come back from South Africa, and we can see their passion, the desire they have to serve there. What they're doing there is at its core working in a church planting movement. Their particular organization they're working with is very, very focused on working with the local church. So building up the local church so that the local church can become a self-sustaining community that then is able to strengthen itself, to grow itself, and reproduce, and then reach out into the community. So they spend a lot of time doing discipleship of pastors and members of the community so that they can build that church to a point where the church can do what a church is supposed to do in the local community. So they're doing everything that they can to make these churches functioning bodies so that they can start filling this hole in the gospel that Brian had talked about. From a material perspective, they try to provide for the different ministries that these churches are involved in by doing food packs, blankets, clothing, Bibles, teaching materials. These are the smaller scale financial things. If you go onto the Tondinani website, which is one of the links on that resource page, you will see some of the ways that you can actually give to them financially to help them with some of the things that are going on, and some of the smaller ones. Some of the larger commitments they have are to orphan homes, Bible training centers, church property buildings, and short-term mission-based camps. These orphan homes in particular, the government there and the government orphan system is really so overloaded that they have a backlog of orphans that need to be cared for. So these orphan homes are in place, and the government system is shuffling children into these orphan homes, and the Willoughbys work directly with one of these orphan homes, and probably more than one, I think, but I know of one that they're working with. Okay. And they're in a situation where things are so backed up that the government calls them and says, we have more, can you take more? And their only response can be, your laws say that we can't take more. So, the government's pushing them to take more, and then they have laws in place that say, if you have more than this many children in this orphan home, then we can fine you and all of these things. So there's a great need for money for more orphan homes and money for the people that can house these orphan homes, and so they can take in more of these orphans and care for them and provide them families that can adopt them and care for them. So the Willoughbys, their needs are, I'm not sure if I have another slide. Nope. The needs of the Willoughbys, they're the same as any nation, any orphan ministry. There's material needs, the food, the clothing, all of these things you can help provide for. The orphan homes, etc. These are larger scale things, and we can't say directly how, as an orphan ministry here at the church, will eventually get involved in some of this stuff, in some of these things with a larger group. But we would also say, don't be afraid to engage in some of this yourself. And always they need our prayers. And they would say every time you talk to the Willoughbys, the last thing is come and visit us sometime. So they would always love, and the stewards would say, what do we want most? We want co-laborers, people that are doing the same thing, people that are willing to get their hands dirty and come and do some of this with us. So all of these things. I'm burning through this. I know nobody else stuck to 7 minutes. I'm not angry. I'm just saying. The overview of the needs of Japan. So as of March of 2011, there were 36,450 children in the orphanage system in Japan. The unusual thing about Japan is that 90% of the children in their orphanage system are not even legally adoptable. And it sounds strange, but the government-run orphan system there has actually created a culture where institutionalizing a child through adulthood is the norm. You have families in Japan that for any given reason, whether it be financial or they weren't supposed to have a child, these kind of things going on, so they will take their child, they will put it into the orphanage, and the orphanage the government system, very, very rarely severs parental rights. You heard them talking about parental rights earlier. So they will very rarely sever parental rights because it places a stigma on the person that put the child into the home. And resulting then in these children very rarely ever getting adopted. And they're comfortable with that because being adopted also puts a stigma on the child. So there's this whole strange thing going on with adoption there, where they're obviously orphans, but they're not doing anything really to adopt them. Another part of this is what's called their Koseki system. It's basically it's a glorified family tree system. They're very much about family and honor in Japan, and so they have a public family tree system there that anybody can go look at and see. And it doesn't sound in and of itself like a terrible thing, but because if you are adopted and parental rights are severed, you are starting your own new family tree. And that becomes evident to any employer you have, or any enemies that you have, or anybody that wants to look at your family tree. There's such a stigma on adoption in your family line that they are working very hard to not have adoption anywhere represented on your family tree. So all of these things. You might see that Japan, as far as statistically speaking goes, they've got elevated adoption statistics. And I say elevated because the adoptions that are going on in Japan are largely adoptions of adults. So the adoptions that you see in Japan are people that want to continue their family line and pass on their family business. So they will take someone that has been working with them for a very long time, and they will adopt them into their family so they can hand over the business to them. That will be their adopted son. So there's adoption of adults. And where all that is happening, adoption of these children that don't have parents is not happening. These orphanages they'll encourage the parents to come and visit the kids on holidays and even take them home on the holidays. And then after the holidays, the parents will take them back and leave them at the orphanage and go back home again. So it's just this sort of strange perpetualization of the orphanage system and children unable to get out of it. Compassionate adoption in Japan it's an unfamiliar concept. It's only rarely been introduced into Japan as a concept that is something that can actually happen. So our connection to Japan is through the Marcies. And what they've communicated to us is that they've got a personal interest in adoption. They've been looking into it in the country. And if it's difficult for a Japanese family to adopt a Japanese child in Japan, it's all that more difficult for an American family living in Japan to adopt a Japanese child in Japan. But they are going to make a go of it when they return from their furlough in 2014. And they're doing this through fostering to adopt, which is far from being the easiest option. We heard from the stewards. It's emotionally taxing. It's very difficult. And in a country where parental rights are rarely, if ever, severed, there's potential for them to be on a roller coaster ride for the next couple of years as they get children into their home and parental rights are never severed, so they're going to have to go back or all of these things. So for the Marcies, we can pray for them as a family. We can pray for the children that are brought into their home and the kind of stigma that gets tied to the families and the children that are involved in adoption. We can pray for them for their material needs, and we'll be keeping in touch with them about these sorts of things, and just pray for them for wisdom as they have to go through this process in the future. The last one we want to touch on is India. This is a country with 25 million orphans. It's the largest number of orphans for a single nation in the world. It's kind of a startling number. India is a nation that we know for its great cultural divide, among other things. So it's a country where you can walk down one street and see these towering, beautiful skyscrapers, and then on the next block, you're walking through just these squalid living conditions. And there's just a high level of wealth and a very, very low level of poverty. And whether cause or effect, or a bit of both, India has also become home to a thriving sex trade. So as of 2007, the Ministry of Women and Children report that there are over 3 million female sex workers in India, with nearly 70% of those sex workers actually entering that trade voluntarily, and nearly 40% doing so before the age of 18. Human Rights Watch puts the figure of total sex trade workers in India at around 20 million, with roughly 1.2 million of these being underage. And to be clear, prostitution is legal in India. So this is a place where prostitution is part of the culture. Young girls are particularly at risk here. 1 in 4 women in India are illiterate, and this one problem begats another. And one in 4 of women are being sexually abused before reaching the age of 18 in India. So in a country where prostitution is legal and it's actually passed down as a way of life and a tradition from mother to daughter, the danger to those without parents at all is something that can't be understated, I don't think. You've got people that have said prostitution is okay as part of the culture, and part of their religious practices is to make them, these little girls part of the temple practices, and prostitution is even involved in the religion there. So for those that don't even have parents, you can see the risk of getting involved in this thriving sex trade in India. So we've had the opportunity to talk with, there are some other things here, but I'm trying to stay 7 minutes over already. But some of these sites on that resource page give you a little bit more information about this. We've touched base with Sanjay Delavai over the last few months with the work he's doing with LCMI. And his ministry is focused on bringing Christ to the children in India. And so, though he's not, and I'll say this up front, though he's not directly working with orphans in these camps, many of them are sent by their families and so forth, but some of them are orphans. But there has to be an acknowledgement that when you're dealing with a culture that has such a pervasive issue as this, when you're spreading the gospel to the families in this country, you are dealing with the orphan problem. If you're sharing Christ and you're sharing the gospel, you're helping to deal with the orphan problem. So we see what he's doing as directly affecting this. The camps are openly Christian. Everybody knows this when they send them there, but they still draw in a number of unbelievers. They work through the local church, and the local church provides them a list of families, and they encourage the families to send their children on, and then these children from the Christian families go back into their community and have non-Christian friends, and they talk to them, and then the non-Christian friends end up coming to these as well. And basically, the communities know it as a safe, positive place for the children to come, so they continue to send them. They focus there on teaching life skills and providing training and support for families with special needs children, which, as much as children are at risk, special needs children are even more at risk because they are less likely to be taken under the wing of a family if something happens to their parents. They offer free medical supplies and services, and they've recently begun to help stem the tide of literacy too by actually working with the children as they grow older to provide them with scholarships and making sure they're getting out and they have a vocation when they are out of school and they're getting out into the workplace and are able to provide for themselves without feeling the need to voluntarily go into prostitution to pay for their own needs. They've also begun just recently to provide an elective for teens through what's called the Project 61 ministry. This focuses on teaching male and female campers how a godly man should treat a woman and how to be a godly man and woman when it comes to the opposite sex. I obviously don't have another slide, but I'm going to keep talking. This ministry is just a need that they've really, as they've spent more time there, it's become clear to them talking to campers. And after a specific conversation between a camper and one of their staff members about an abusive situation that one of these campers was involved in, it's like the light bulb went on for them. And they said, why are we not talking about this with the kids? Why are we not addressing this need with them? So this ministry has really opened up new doors for them as far as children coming forward with stories of abuse and seeking help, and just educating this next generation of kids that are coming to the camps to be men and women that do not have the kind of views of other men and women that lead to a pervasive sex culture. So this past year, just one story about what Sanjay has talked to us about here. There's a young girl. Her name is Bhavani, and she lost her mother. Well, first of all, she's handicapped. I'm not sure exactly how old she is, but she's under the age of 10. Her mother she lost several years ago. Her father had come to the camp with her, and he came to Christ and overcame alcoholism and was a believer. And he was recently killed this past year in an altercation. He didn't give any more details than that, but his father was in some sort of altercation and ended up being killed. So Bhavani is now an orphan. Because she is, we said that these handicapped children are even more at risk. Sanjay and his co-workers have been petitioning orphanages in the area to take her in. She basically was in the slum that she had grown up in, and just people in the slum were sort of marginally taking care of her, and then her relatives came and took her because they had their Hindu funeral rites that they had to perform, and any living family members had to be part of those funeral rites. So the extended family took her on as long as those funeral rites were going on, and after they were over, they put her back in the slum that she was in by herself with that community there. So Sanjay and LCMI are trying to find an orphanage that will take her in. Most of the orphanages that they're talking to, in fact, all up to this point, have been reticent to do so because of her handicap. But it's a need that's out there, and this is the way that they sort of come to try to help children that are coming to these camps. So you can see that even though they're not directly dealing with orphans, these children have the potential of becoming orphans on any given day. And then LCMI has the opportunity to step up and be Christ in their lives. So you can be praying for LCMI and Sanjay. Pray particularly for Lavani. We talked to him about if they find an orphanage for her, being able to provide a scholarship for her care as an orphan ministry, so that the orphanages are less hesitant to take her on and provide for her. So there are all these needs that can be met here. This is the orphan ministry through missions that we've been talking about. So, like I said, a lot of prayer can go into this. They would always love to have people come out and spend time with them in the nations that they're working in. But prayer and just keeping in contact with them is important.
As you heard Michael mention, we all burned through our 7 minutes, because as I said at the beginning, to each one of these topics, we could spend, we could do an entire seminar just in any one of those. If we looked at just the needs of one individual orphan in a specific country, we could spend 3 hours on that. So one of our hopes for the orphan ministry group moving forward is to be able to do things like that, where instead of having a broad overview, is to look at some of the more specific needs and how we can be addressing those moving forward. Before I do take questions and answers, I want to take a moment and kind of pat ourselves on the back. There's a lot of people here today who need some things that you guys may or may not be aware of. Like while we're meeting here, Michelle Schwaldings was in the other room stacking chairs. A lot of people work in the nursery. Joe and Allison Mowry are part of our group here, and they, instead of being here with us, they knew we had need in the child care rooms, and they said, we'll take care of it. So there's a whole multitude of things. I was astonished to see how quickly the food and chairs got set up in the other room. I was like, wow, it took like 5 minutes, and boom, it was up. So for all of you who were involved in that, thank you. I know even some of you guys here who weren't necessarily part of our orphan group got involved in that also. And thank you guys all for coming too. I was likely astonished, or just as well astonished at seeing the sheer number of people here. I was thinking 20 to 30, and I give a brief little count, not counting the presenters here. There's 40 of you, which is a fantastic number. So we are well over our 2 o'clock time. But if anybody does have some burning questions that would pertain to the whole group, if there's an individual question that you want to ask, we're going to be milling around. You heard each of our interests are. I have some experience with international adoption as well, so if you have questions there, I can help you with that. I saw one back. Yes?
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware, but this is something nice for people who are a little bit older and have their children raised. But Bethany Christian Services, I know, are doing a relatively new ministry where you can take a family of children, say 3. It's a foster program, and it is for people whose parents are either ill and they have to deal with something right now and can't have them in their home or whatever the situation is. But anyway, these children come with their siblings, which is very nice. They do not have to be separated. Some moms have to have surgeries, and they're single moms, and they have 3 kids. What are they going to do if they have nobody else to help them? And I think that's a nice service too for people who may be a little bit older and want to.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that. I've been playing phone tag with Ruby, I forget her last name, but I think Andrew actually was it you who gave her name to our church? Or somebody met up with her and mentioned that, hey, our church is interested in doing this through Bethany, and she called the office, who then sent me an email, and she and I have gone back and forth for probably about 3 weeks now. But she represents Safe Families for Children, and I think that's the program you're describing. And so within the next week or two, we're probably going to sit down as a group and meet with her, listen to her as to how we could, as a church, partner with her. And then we'll take whatever we come up with, present to the audit board, and it goes, goes through the chain like that. But that is definitely something on the radar. So thank you for reminding me to bring that up. Other questions for the group? Out of here. The Eagles are winning. Are they playing? All right, well, I'll go ahead and pray then. If you guys have questions, I said we'll be around, so feel free to ask. Dear Lord, we thank you again for this time that you've given to us. Thank you for each and every person that's here. We pray that as we go on from here, Lord, that you would work in the hearts of those that you desire to work in, and that we would each be able to meet the needs of the orphans in ways that you have designed for us. Grant us wisdom, Lord, as we think over these thoughts, and grant us the ability to work out the things that you have us to work out. In your name, amen.